mic test. Direct mag-ano naman tayo, di ba? Yung press con. Okay. The news day continues here on One News Now. I'm Jess De Los Santos. This time around, let's go through the press briefing by the Philippine Statistics Authority wherein they are announcing December inflation print. Let's take a listen.
Sa paggalaw ng mga presyo ng ating bilihin sa Pilipinas, itong nakalipas na Desyembre 2022. Ating pakinggan ang report ni Yusek Dennis Mapa.
Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Ang Philippine Statistics Authority ay mag-uulat ng antas ng inflation sa bansa para sa buwan ng Disyembre 2022. Ang headline inflation o pagtaas ng presyo ng mga produkto at serbisyo sa bansa ay bumilis sa antas na 8.1% nitong Disyembre 2022. Ito ang pinakamataas na naitalang inflation simula noong Nobyembre 2008. Noong Nobyembre 2022, ang inflation ay naitala sa antas na 8.0% at 3.1% naman noong Disyembre 2021. Ang average inflation mula Enero hanggang Disyembre 2022 ay nasa antas na 5.8%. Ang pangunahing dahilan ng mas mataas na antas ng inflation nitong Disyembre 2022 kaysa noong Nobyembre 2022 ay ang mas mabilis na pagtaas ng presyo ng food and non-alcoholic beverages. Ito ay may 10.2% inflation at 38.9% share sa pagtaas ng pangkalatang inflation sa bansa. Ang nag-ambag ng malaki sa pagtaas ng inflation ng food and non-alcoholic beverages ay ang mas mabilis na pagtaas ng presyo ng mga sumunod. Bananas at iba pa, partikular ang repolyo na may 32.4% inflation mula sa 25.8% inflation noong Nobyembre 2022. Bigas na may 3.4% inflation mula sa 3.1% inflation noong Nobyembre at fruits and nuts tulad ng saging na may 7.6% inflation mula sa 6.2% inflation noong Nobyembre 2022. Ang pangalawang commodity group na nag-ambag ng mas mataas na antas ng inflation nitong Disyembre 2022 ay ang restaurants and accommodation services na may 7.0% inflation at 24.8% share sa pagtaas ng pangkalatang inflation sa bansa. Ito ay dahil sa mas mabilis na pagtaas ng presyo ng restaurants, cafe at na may 7.0% inflation mula sa 6.5% inflation noong Nobyembre 2022. Ang pangatlong dahilan ng pagtaas ng inflation nitong Disyembre 2022 ay ang housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels na may 7.0% inflation at 11.0% share sa pagtaas ng pangkalatang inflation sa bansa. Ito ay dahil sa mas mabilis na pagtaas ng presyo ng mga sumusunod. LPG na may 1.8% inflation mula sa negative 2.9% inflation noong Nobyembre at kahoy na panggatong na may 6.8% inflation mula sa 6.0% inflation noong Nobyembre 2022. Nakaambag din sa pagtaas ng inflation ang bayad sa tubig na may negative 1.1% inflation mula sa negative 1.4% inflation noong Nobyembre 2022. Pagdating naman sa overall inflation nitong Disyembre 2022, ang pangunahing nagambag ay ang food and non-alcoholic beverages na may 10.2% inflation at 48.1% share. Ang mga pangkat ng pagkain na pangunahing nagambag sa inflation ng food and non-alcoholic beverages ay ang mga sumusunod. Vegetables, tubers, cooking bananas at iba pa, partikular ang sibuyas na may 32.4% inflation. Meat and other parts of slaughtered land animals gaya ng manok na may 7.4% inflation. At sugar, confectionery and desserts tulad ng refined sugar na may 38.8% inflation. Ang pangalawang commodity group na may pinakamalaking ambag sa pangkalatang inflation ay ang housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuels na may inflation na 7.0% at 18.7% share sa pangkalatang inflation. Ang mga pangunahing nagambag sa inflation ng housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuels ay ang mga sumusunod. Kuryente na may 20.1% inflation. Renta sa bahay na may 4.0% inflation. Kahoy na panggatong na may 6.8% inflation. Ang ikatlo sa may pinakambag nitong Disyembre 2022. Ang commodity group na ito ay nagtala ng 7.7% inflation at 13.2% share. Ang mga pangunahing nagambag sa inflation ng transport ay ang mga sumusunod. Other passenger transport by road tulad ng pamasahe sa jeep na may 13.5% inflation. Diesel na may 40.3% inflation at gasoline na may 11.3% inflation. Sa 13 commodity groups, 9 ang nagtala ng mas mabilis na pagtaas ng presyo nitong Disyembre 2022. Ito ay ang mga sumusunod. Food and non-alcoholic beverages na may inflation na 10.2%. Alcoholic beverages and tobacco na may 10.7% inflation, clothing and footwear na may 3.9% inflation, housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuels na may 7.0% inflation, furnishings, household equipment, and routine household maintenance na may 4.8% inflation, health na may 3.1% inflation, inflation, restaurants and accommodation services na may 7.0% inflation, at personal care and miscellaneous goods and services na may 4.5% inflation. Samantala, nagpakita taas siya ngunit sa taas itong Disyembre ang transport 11.7% inflation. Nanatili naman ang antas ng inflation noong Nobyembre 2022 ang mga sumunod info na may inflation, services na may 3.6% inflation at 5% inflation. Ang core inflation sa bansa ay bumilis din sa antas na 6.9% nitong Disyembre 2022. Noong Nobyembre 2022, ang core inflation ay naitala sa antas na 6.5% at 1.8% naman noong Disyembre 2021. Pagdating sa National Capital Region, ang inflation nitong Disyembre 2022 ay tumaas sa antas na 7.6% mula sa 7.5% inflation noong Nobyembre 2022. Noong Disyembre 2021, ang inflation sa National Capital Region ay naitala sa 2.1%. Ang pangunahing dahilan ng pagtaas ng antas ng inflation sa National Capital Region ay ang mas mabilis na pagtaas ng presyo ng restaurants and accommodation services na may 9.5% inflation at 46.4% share nitong Disyembre 2022. Ito ay dahil sa mas mabilis na pagtaas ng presyo ng restaurants, cafe and the like na may 9.5% inflation mula sa 8.8%.
You just heard Undersecretary Dennis Claire Maap of the Philippine Statistics Authority reporting inflation figures for the month of December. Again, that accelerated at 8.1% compared to the 3.1% that we had a year ago. That also is slightly quicker than the 8% print back in November. Again, at 8.1%, that is the highest print since November of 2008 at 9.1%. That brings average inflation at 5.8% for full year 2022. Core inflation is also quicker for the month of December at 6.9% compared to the 6.5% that was reported back in November. Let's parse through those inflation numbers some more with Professor Percival Peña Reyes, Director of the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development. Prof, good day, rainy morning. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Happy New Year to you and to your viewers.
All right, first your thoughts on that inflation print, 8.1%.
Well, we were actually forecasting something higher, around 8.9%. Okay, but it's good because the figure brings us to closer to the assumption of the government, annual inflation assumption. So it's within their assumption. Okay, and we also see that food is still the main driver of inflation for the month, since oil prices last month decreased. Okay, and this appears to be an indication of a pass-through, because inflation drivers previous to that were really transport and fuel.
Right.
Okay, but now it's more into food.
Now, do we see
So,
that?
yeah.
Go ahead, Prof. Go ahead, continue.
Yes, but of course we still have to be in a cautionary state. There's still a possibility that it will go up next month in January.
So there's a possibility that this is not yet the peak. Up to
Yes,
what level do you
there's,
see inflation hitting, at least in January?
It's quite possible. It might kiss 9%.
Wow, 9% for the month of
It
January.
might,
Why is that? Why is that?
It still might be that effect, no, on food prices. We're still feeling that. Also in our estimates, transport also might be a driver of it.
But,
We hope that by January that will be the peak.
and then from then on, you see at least inflation tempering down or cooling down a bit. Give us your model here, trend at least for 2023. When do you see us going back to within target at 2 to 4%? Or is that even a possibility for 2023?
Well, we there are of course positive indications, no, for 2023. For one thing, as noted by my colleague, Dr. Alvin Ang, in our weekly column, okay, there are, of course, three key events, no, global headwinds that added to the rising prices of 2022. But we see in 2023 key events that will change the course of the global gloom towards recession. Okay. These are positive indications, no, I would like to mention. First, there is the possibility of COVID-19 being endemic.
Okay.
Second, there is the reopening of the China economy. And third is the potential peace in Ukraine. So there is optimism in all of these. Okay. And of course, with regards to the endemicity, okay, World Health Organization has announced the end of pandemic could help prioritize resources towards lessening or even totally removing mobility and goods. Okay, and about the Chinese reopening, okay, this could reignite global trade with its factories going back to produce for the world. This reopening will also in turn address supply bottlenecks and shortages to ultimately help lower supply-induced inflation. And regarding potential peace in Ukraine, the third thing that I mentioned, okay, recent pronouncements of Russia appear to point to their willingness to go back to the negotiating table. So these three, I think, based on our reading, no, of current events, no, this will help normalize global trade, bring back the cost of production and shipment to comfortable levels, and make commodity prices such as oil and food predictable based on weather and capacities rather than speculations. So we're seeing good indications for this year. Okay. But still, it would be prudent to remain cautious, no? Because in January it might peak in January figure, no? But we're hoping, okay, barring other factors, no, that might mess that up, no. We hope that these three good things, no, would happen this year to ease inflation down.
Okay, given that, of course, the BSP has been doing much of the heavy lifting, at least in 2022, hiking rates. Up to when do you see them extending this level of activity here? And when do you see them hitting the pause button as well? At the same time, on the non-monetary side, what needs to be done to make sure that inflation at least goes back to within target?
Well, I think they wouldn't need to be as aggressive as in fighting inflation if these factors come into play, as I mentioned. Okay, so probably when these things come into play, they would the pressure to curb inflation wouldn't be as strong on them as it would otherwise be, no, if if we're seeing negative developments from outside, because really inflation is largely externally supply side driven.
All right, so again, inflation for the month of December at 8.1%, but as Prof. Percival here is pointing out, there's a likelihood of that hitting 9% for the month of January. Thank you very much for your time today. Percival Peña-Reyes, Director of the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. You're still watching One News Now. I'm Jess De Los Santos. Chinese President Xi Jinping says China is open to resuming talks on a possible joint oil and gas exploration with the Philippines. Reuters quoted Xi as saying that he is willing to do it in the non-disputed areas of the South China Sea. Xi made the statement as he met with President Bongbong Marcos, who wraps up his three-day state visit in Beijing today. President Marcos, for his part, said they discussed possible steps to avoid mistakes and misunderstandings in the future. Beijing's sweeping claims in the South China Sea, which is rich in oil and gas, have been a source of tension in the region. President Bongbong Marcos said Chinese leader Xi Jinping has promised to compromise and find solutions for Filipino fishermen to be able to fish in the disputed waters. The president said he was finally able to bring up the plight of Filipino fishermen during his bilateral meeting with Xi. The meeting yielded 14 bilateral agreements, one of which sought to establish a communication mechanism for maritime issues.
On the political front, we also discussed what we can do to move forward to avoid any possible mistakes, misunderstandings that could trigger a bigger problem than what we already have. The president promised that we will find a compromise and find a solution that will be beneficial so that our fishermen might be able to fish again in their natural fishing ground.
Prior to meeting with the Chinese president, Marcos Jr. also met with Li Zhanshu, chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. According to House Speaker Martin Romualdez, Li hoped that future talks on the disputed waters would be exclusive between China and the Philippines.
decided that we'll try to emphasize where we have common interests, where we have a lot of cooperation currently. We will leverage on that goodwill, and we will leverage on all that political diplomatic capital. And I think it's been resolved that we can discuss the contentious issues in a very amicable manner bilaterally.
And those are the top stories of the hour. Join us again at 9:45 a.m. as we continue to monitor the day's biggest stories. You can also catch One News on Signal Play. Register an account now at signalplay.com.ph so you can stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos. We are One News, all sides, all the time.